Welcome to my Draw My Life video. I'd just like to point out before we begin, I am the worst drawer in the world ever, so please excuse my terrible illustrations. I was born in Ireland, which is a terrible depiction there. I was born in Dublin in Ireland in 1980. I was born into a family. I was the third child born. I had a sister and a brother before me, and that's me there. Hi. When I was born, my father wanted to call me John, and my mom was like, nope, because there's a tradition in my family which goes back generation of generation. There's always been like a John Joly for like hundreds of generations going back, and my mom was like, no. My grandparents like, call him John. My mom was real stubborn, and she was like, no way, I'm not gonna call him John. So she decided in the end that she was going to call me Jonathan. We lived in a relatively sort of average house in a relatively sort of average area. It was a nice road. It was in a place called Terranure, which is a village in South Dublin. When I was a kid, I shared a bedroom with my brother. It was cool. It was like a clubhouse, like my best friend. We had like the most fun in there ever, the most like ridiculous, dangerous, and stupid fun you could ever do. And of course, there was no girls allowed. A couple of years later, in 1983, we all had to go to the hospital because my mom decided it would be a good idea to bring another girl into the family. So we all trucked off to the hospital to go meet my new little sister. So I was no longer the baby of the family. I was all grown up. So I had my oldest sister Ruth, my brother Simon, me, and my little sister Leah. Life in Ireland in the 1980s was kind of tough, because although there was a recession, it was easier in the sense that, no one ever had anything to begin with. No one had money, no one had food, no one had anything to lose. So myself and my brother, though, we would play in the garden a lot. We did have a castle in the garden, and in the castle we had a full group of warriors. They were like specialist bow and arrow men. I also happened to have a pet. I had a wolf, sort of bear. Actually, no. Okay, there was no castle, no man, and no bear. There was essentially a garden, some rocks, and a couple of cardboard boxes if we were lucky. But imagination, was limitless. As a kid, I always wanted to have a dog. I always felt that like a dog could be your best friend, better than any human. And one day I was walking down the road and I happened to notice inside a bush was a dog, and I said hello to the doggy, and the doggy said hi back, and I decided that I was like, hey, do you want to come and live with me? And the dog said yes, so I decided to bring the dog home. It was kind of hard for the first few days hiding the dog from my mom and dad, but they eventually found out. And they found out who the owners were. They contacted them and they came and took the dog away. And I was like really hard, and I was really upset that I lost like my new friend. But it turned out that the dog was actually pregnant, and the owners decided to give me one of the puppies. So I called the puppy Benji, and Benji was my new friend. Another aspect of my childhood growing up in a sort of poverty-stricken country during the 80s was that, it was a lot of stress on my parents, and they didn't get along very well. So they would constantly fight. And it was very difficult for me and my brothers and sisters. We would sit upstairs in our rooms and we would just listen to this constant fighting and crashing and smashing. And I think that had an effect on me, because I closed up a lot. I didn't socialize much, and I found it very difficult for interpersonal communication. So when I would be in school, people would wonder why I wouldn't do the popular social things, and people got frustrated with me, and they would laugh at me, and they would call me names. They think I was just a weirdo just because I wouldn't conform to what everybody else was doing, and that was very hard on me. For years I would just sort of put up with it, and I would just sort of like sit in my room, and I would just like write short stories and poetry, and just think about a different life, a different existence. And and I would still hear, my mom, my dad, the fighting just escalated and it got worse. And, it didn't matter how much you shut yourself away, you could never really escape it. And I just figured out I had to do something. So one day I figured out a way to escape it all, and that was to essentially escape this life that I had. And I figured out that I had this incredible imagination where I could essentially create a world that suited me, an imagination that allowed me to create a world for myself inside my own head. And that's exactly what I did. For years I shut myself away. I lived inside this world. Not only did I have imaginary friends, but I had an imaginary life. It was filled with people that I wanted to look after me. Funnily enough, it was filled with women, and not in kind of like, oh, you so like thinking of girls and stuff. Girls that were just moms, It was just filled with moms that would just bring me out in the park, would just play with me, would hold my hand, would tell me they love me. And it was one of the happiest times of my childhood, which is funny because it didn't actually exist. It all existed in my head. One of the hard parts is that, while I was enjoying this existence outside in the real world, I was just an empty shell of a person walking around, and I was still going to school every day and being picked on, and people were calling me. And the more I subtracted myself from reality, the more people got more frustrated with me and more angry with me. And my parents, they would look on and they would wonder, like, why is Jonathan like this? Why would he act like this? Until one day my mom decided that there was definitely something wrong here. It was not just me just being like a weird kid, and she got in touch with this specialist school, which was run by the Jesuit Society, and decided to bring me in for an interview. The interview process was quite unique. They basically just sat there with me, they watched me play, they made me draw pictures, and after a while they decided that they would take me into the school, and the school is called St. Declan's. One of my fondest memories, which is kind of unique, of St. Declan's is when you would go into the school, you would have to take your shoes off and you would put slippers on. And I always remember that, coming in the morning, taking off my shoes and putting slippers on. There was also a swing set in the garden, and had a huge tree with a big garden, and then there was a monkey bar set. And I actually had my first girlfriend experience while I was there. There was this girl called Jenny. And my friends all told me, they were like, oh my god, like Jenny really likes you. And I was like, okay, am I supposed to like her? And they said, oh, why don't you ask her out? So I did. I went up to her, I climbed the monkey bars and I said, you want to be my girlfriend? And she said yes. And then I did not speak to her for 5 months, and then we broke up. I spent 3 years in St. Declan's before I moved on back into mainstream school. It was quite frightening for me going back into mainstream school after my last experience, so my parents decided to send me to a school called Rosmini, which was a public school. The first 2 years in secondary school were quite scary, and I didn't really have any friends. I was trying to adjust back into a mainstream school. I found it very difficult. I was still very inward thinking, and I wasn't very social until in third year, in my junior cert year, I actually started to go to discos. I had my first girlfriend, and it was like while at discos, I started to see other people from my school, and they would notice me, and they'd be like, oh hey, you're in my school, aren't you? And I was like, oh yeah. And they're like, oh, you've got a girlfriend and stuff. And I was like, yeah. And then everything sort of changed from there. I sort of became popular. I sort of made loads of friends. I cut my hair, I changed my clothes, I started listening to different music, I started going out more, I had more girlfriends, I had more friends, I had more parties to go to. It was an idyllic time for me because everything sort of changed. I had like house parties every weekend because my parents were happy that I was happy, so I became like this house party guy and this like super popular guy. And when I was around the same age, I went with a friend of mine down to a place called St. Anthony's Cathedral in the city centre, and it was actually a dance studio called Dance the Nations. And that to me is a big impact point in my life because I was really affected by that, and a lot of the kids in there had come from kind of have difficulties or emotional problems, and we all just sort of like got together, and there was a great sense of feeling something was awoken in me. When I would be sad, I would go down there, and they'd play the music and we'd learn the routines, and there was something about dancing and expressing myself, where I went from happy to sad, and I just absolutely loved it. I found an outlet that I just really, really enjoyed. With finding something new in my life, though, I found that I started to get bored with the life that I had sort of built up for myself. I was bored with my friends. I was bored with what we were every weekend. I was bored with my girlfriends. I was bored with every aspect, and I just got tired of it. And I started to sort of, remove myself from them. And then at the same time, upon doing that, I became more aware of the difficulties again at home and how difficult it was. And it was coming up to my leaving cert, and it was just all too much, and I decided just to quit. So I moved into my first apartment. I wouldn't even call it apartment. Let's call it like a 1-bedroom bedsit flat in the middle of the city centre in Parnell Street in Dublin City. It was all right. It was an experience. I'll give it that. I didn't last that long in that particular place, but it was just somewhere peaceful that I could call home. One of the aspects, of course, to moving out and being independent is, unfortunately, you have to get a job. And most of my friends were off in college and university, and I was off just working. And I didn't find it very difficult to get a job. I find that I spoke well, and I was clever enough to be able to get jobs. But my only problem is that I didn't have a very good attention span. So as fast as I was getting jobs, I was being fired from jobs, and then I was hired, and then I was fired. And that just that was like a pattern in my life that just went on for quite some time. I also, during that period as well, I actually, I joined a band. We formed a band, myself and four other guys. We were a 5-piece vocal harmony group called New Entry. One of the guys, we didn't stick around with us, so we became a 4-piece. It was kind of fun, we toured with some really good, well-known people. We got to play the Point. It's called the O2 now, about 9,000 people. So that was quite an experience to do. But one of the things, while I was doing it, I don't know, as much as I loved it because I always wanted to dance and perform, something in me just felt empty, and I changed, and eventually I quit that too. I sort of went through a period of not really sure what I was supposed to do or who I was supposed to be or what. I went through that period of transition from knowing that the dreams that I had as a child weren't really representing the person I had become. And what I'm doing here is I'm sort of just giving a rundown of all the different jobs. Like, I have been every job you can think of. I have done it as a technician, a stockbroker, event manager. I've worked in marketing, I worked in sales, I worked in teaching, I worked as brand manager, I was satellite installing, I did web design, I did commercial. Every job you could think of, I was just jumping from job to job. I was just searching for somewhere where I would fit in, and I was just constantly upset and unhappy and depressed, and along with that was a trail of girlfriends. And I'd like to apologize for anybody that I've hurt along the way, but I was misunderstood. I didn't know who I was, and without knowing who I was, there was no way I could be in a relationship with anybody, or a job in that matter. And I kept that up from 19 to 20 to 21 to 22 to 23 to 24, and at 25 I would say it was one of the biggest impact years of my life. I decided to make a big decision, and I moved to Cork. I was currently in a sort of a long-term relationship with this girl. We both decided that it was probably going to be best, and she was quite supportive, and we decided that we'd move to Cork and that I would enroll myself into college. We had a dog at the time. His name was Philly. He was a little West Highland Terrier. He was so cute. We decided to move into this sort of small little 1-bed sort of apartment out near Cove, and I enrolled myself into CSN, which is Closh Stefan Nefa. It's a further education college, and I studied multimedia. It was very difficult at first with us. We would fight all the time because, we come from a situation where both of us had a job, and now I didn't have a job. I was in college, and she was working. So we eventually, we broke up over it, and we decided to move out and move on with our lives without each other. And one of the hardest aspects, and I always remember, it was one of the biggest sort of crossroads in my life, was having to give up Philly, and it was so difficult. And I remember when she came and took Philly away, and I was so upset. And my family was saying, come back to Dublin, and I was like, no, I really want to commit to this. I really want to stay in college. So I decided to go out and try and find a job. What I'm drawing here is pretty much the only possessions I had in my life. I had no money, I had no food, I had no friends, I had no family, I had no job. It was just me and my motorbike, and I was enrolled in college, and that was it. And I had to, I could have just given up. I could have just taken the easy way, gone back to Dublin, fit back in, got the jobs back, whatever. But I figured, like, you know what? No way. I'm going to do this. So after applying to all the cool jobs, I couldn't get any. So eventually I got a job in Tesco working on the checkouts. And I worked like all day long. You know what I mean? I was working in that job, and then if I wasn't working in that job, I was in college. And when I wasn't in college, I was like on the checkouts. Boop, boop. I think one of the most defining moments for me within that period of my life, I think there's a lot. I think this particular time period of me, so much happened. But one day I was driving home on my motorbike, and it was like coming up towards Christmas, and a car crashed into me. And I remember just lying on the side of the road thinking, like, I've got no one to call, I've got no money. The only thing I did have was that motorbike, and now it was broken, and I had absolutely nothing. And the house I was renting with, I just sort of, I paid rent, so I could afford that, but because I still had the job. But I remember sitting there that Christmas on my own. Like, there was nobody there, nobody around. And I remember New Year's Eve sitting there listening, to the countdown. I saw it on TV, and I was just on my own, and I had absolutely nothing in my life. And I remember sitting there saying to myself, I'm never, ever, ever going to be in this position ever again. And I made a commitment, and I said, and I just started working, and I just started working so hard, and I put everything I had into college. When you do that, things tend to just work out, At the same time, I started making friends from college, and we started to sort of like go out more. And then suddenly I had more of a social life, and I was going to parties, and I was going to nightclubs, and I started to sort of have an essence of like things coming back together again, But one thing in my life that I missed, because I'm such a little sappy sucker, is that I missed a girlfriend. I missed having an emotional connection with somebody. I remember sitting there thinking to myself, I need a plan. I need to do something for myself. And I decided that I would make a music video. So I sought out some musicians, and I asked them, do you want to make a music video? And they were like, oh yeah, sure, defo. And I was like, awesome. So we put out a casting call through Bebo, and lots of people wanted to be involved in it, which was pretty cool. Couple of months down the line, this was around May, myself and one of my friends, we tried to go to this nightclub, but they wouldn't let us in because I think we might have been too wasted or something like that. So his girlfriend was over in Long Island at the time in this cocktail bar, so I went over with him and introduced me to his friends and stuff. And then from the corner of my eye, I see this girl over at the bar, and I think to myself, that is probably the most beautiful girl I've ever seen in my life. And then next to her is this horrid, wretched beast of a man who had like fangs and long hair. Okay, he didn't. But it was her boyfriend, and he's introduced, oh, this is her boyfriend. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna look the other way. And I wasn't very amused by this fact that my future wife had a boyfriend with someone else. Things turned out, she wanted to be in the music video, so we started to talk via Bebo. And I would say something to her, and then she would say something to me, and then I would say something to her, and then we'd start giving each other little loves. And then eventually our relationship progressed to MSN. About a month later, after being friends, she told me that her and her boyfriend actually broke up, which, as you can imagine, I was really, really physically upset by this. And eventually led to us getting closer, and eventually falling in love and deciding to go steady together. After the summer in Munich, we decided to enroll in college in Bournemouth because I wanted to go on and wanted to finish off and get my degree. So I did an interview with the Arts Institute of Bournemouth, and I got in, and myself and Anna moved over to Bournemouth, and we lived in a place called St. John's Road in Boscombe, which was about maybe 20 minutes away from the university. It was like super cheap. It was a bit dodgy. It was a crazy place, but hey, it was our first place together, and it was brilliant. After a few months of living there, Anna's father passed away, which was a very difficult time for both of us. We went back to Ireland for the funeral and everything, and it put like I think that we kind of locked ourselves away from the world. We sort of just made a little place that we had in Bournemouth, and we just sort of locked the world out, and we just spent all our time together. And we just, I went on and I graduated from college, which was brilliant. I got a 2:1 honors degree. I was very proud of myself. Then we moved on to London, which was fine. We got ourselves an apartment down in Greenwich. We also got ourselves a little dog, our first dog. His name was Albie the Maltese, and Anna started to doing YouTube at that time, but that's Anna's story. After a while, we decided to move back to Ireland, because there was nothing really going on at the time. I graduated in the height of a recession, which was probably like the worst time ever to graduate from university. But we moved back to Ireland. We hadn't really got any money. We didn't have a job. We didn't really have much. But we had each other, and we had dreams and hope and passion. And I knew that if I just worked hard enough, things would come together. So I came up with a plan that I would start making videos on YouTube just to get my work out there, just to sort of use it basically as a platform for my portfolio, and maybe hopefully get a job. During that time, we moved back to Cork, because I actually managed to get a job in a studio here in Cork. So I would work in the studio during the day and in the evening times, and during there I would do YouTube. I'd record, obviously, you guys have seen most of the stuff because we're now in vlog territory. But when I wasn't in the studio, I was making YouTube videos, and when I wasn't making YouTube videos, I was in the studio. It was a difficult time for me because I was basically holding down 2 full-time jobs. But I had a plan. I knew if I stuck to it, and it did. I had 2, 3, 4, 5 subscribers, kept growing. The viewing kept growing, which was amazing. And it sort of changed my life. And YouTube has allowed me. YouTube was one of those jobs where it was the first job I'd ever had in my life where I didn't get bored, and I'm still not bored. This is the longest job I've ever had. Anna is the longest girlfriend I've ever had. We got married. We had a baby. We had a dog, and then we had another dog, and then another dog, and then another dog, and then another dog, and then another dog. And my life has gone. I'm happy for the first time in my life, and it's incredible for me, to look back on where I came from and what's happened to me. And he's right in the end, but the truth is, it's not the end. I wouldn't say it's the beginning, but it never ends. It's a journey, and I hope this journey never stops being exciting. And thank you guys for watching my Draw My Life, and I hope you guys liked it. I hope it wasn't too boring. Like it if you want, subscribe if you want, and yeah, I'll see you guys later.